here. Yeah, we'll just get straight into it then. Serial killers that were never caught. Lacking shit.
I think most people would like to believe that when you do something wrong, it'll catch up to you, whether that be legally or even just karma. But as we all know, that isn't always the case. And that's why today I'm going to be discussing serial killers who were never caught. Horrible people doing horrible things that unfortunately were never served justice. At least not yet. One quick note before we begin is that these are real criminals with real victims, and I'm going to be doing my best to be respectful as possible. This video isn't in any particular order, even though this video is a list, simply because I do not want to put any of these people above or below each other. All of these people are horrible and do not deserve a ranking. Now let's get into the video. Starting off, we have the Servant Girl Annihilator. A pretty gruesome name, but he was a pretty gruesome guy. And I felt like he was an appropriate first entry for this list because he was the first known serial killer in the United States of America. Between December 1884 and December 1885, he killed 7 women and 1 man. And he had a very peculiar signature. He killed people with an axe. In just one night, on December 24th, 1885, you're right, Christmas Eve, he murdered 3 victims with an axe, which is why they also called him the Austin Axe Murderer.
I thought he was gonna say like the... Dude, what's that dude's name, bro? Hold on. Let me look him up. Thought they were talking about this dude, the Axeman. Y'all ever heard of the Axeman? He kept, like, killing people with an axe. Like, just crazy killing spree. I don't know. It's crazy, bro.
Obvious reasons, there's not a lot known about this killer, and that's going to be a common trend among all of these killers, unfortunately. And a lot of what is known is the sheer brutality that happened to the victims, and for also obvious reasons, I won't be going into too much detail on that. But one interesting detail that I thought I would share is the fact that there's a rather interesting conspiracy floating around with the Servant Girl killer, specifically being that he could potentially also be Jack the Ripper. Why? Because this string of murders in Texas happened 3 years before the murders of Jack the Ripper across the pond. Could they be the same person? Personally, I'm not sure if there's any validity to it, but it's an interesting thought. Next up, we have a rather interesting situation as this entry isn't just one killer. It's likely many. I'm talking about the Highway of Tears killers. The Highway of Tears is a 719-kilometer long corridor of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert in British Columbia, Canada. And this stretch of highway has become notorious for murders that have happened on it. The crimes happening on this highway date back to as early as 1970 and are still believed to be happening to this day.
Make sure y'all don't go on that road, bro.
And the lack of public transportation, for a lot of the poorer citizens, hitchhiking was a big method of transportation, leaving vulnerable individuals at risk. Unfortunately, in that case, that meant many Indigenous women were at risk. Almost all of the victims of the Highway of Tears were Indigenous women, and there is believed to be at least 80 missing and murdered Indigenous women. One of the saddest parts about the stretch of highway is that a lot of these victims were never even found and are still considered missing and not homicides. And focusing on the criminals, the one interesting part is that only one person has ever been convicted on this highway, and unfortunately, they were only convicted for one murder and could have only possibly been able to commit 2 of them, meaning that there are likely many murderers still out there not served justice. Following that, we have the Oakland County child killer, also known as the babysitter killer. In this story,
bro, killing children is like, that's like down bad. That's like a new low. Like, I mean, if you kill an adult, then at least they have like a shot of fighting back, but you're just killing little children, bro. That's insane. Like just innocent people, innocent children, bro. I'm not saying like that the adults are innocent, that they're not. And I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's still the same thing, but like children, it's kind of crazy to do that, you know, to children.
Story is seriously twisted. As the name may imply, this killer targeted children in Oakland County. Between the span of February 15th, 1976 and March 16th, 1977, only 13 months apart, 2 boys and 2 girls aged 10 to 12 went missing outside of their homes. Each child's body was discovered in a public area within 20 days of their disappearance, and all of the children were either strangled or shot. The 4 deaths triggered a murder investigation which was at the time the largest in U.S. history, and the breaking of this news also caused a significant panic among parents in Michigan. Despite a few promising leads, including the discovery of a vehicle suspected to belong to the killer, this case remains unsolved. In 2012,
Wow.
we had the most recent development, which investigators were able to actually create a DNA profile of the killer. But unfortunately, this didn't match up to any of the suspects or even anybody in the police database. A quick note to mention is that the 4 victims I mentioned are only confirmed victims, and there is potentially many more. And the timeline I mentioned is only the confirmed timeline, and many more could have taken place outside of that. This is just what is confirmed for this killer.
Wow.
Staying on the topic of murderers who targeted children, we have the alphabet murderer, also known as the alphabet killer or the double initial killer. If you haven't noticed already, a common trend is these killers having pretty obvious names, but I don't think it hurts to spell it out. This killer had an affinity for matching initials, and all 3 of their victims had the same first and last initial, with the victims having the
That's
initials
so
CC,
weird.
WW, and MM. These unsolved child murders took place between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York. I'm starting to think it was pretty rough being a child in the 1970s. All of the alphabet killer's
Yeah.
victims were assaulted and strangled, and despite the fact that there was witnesses, specifically several motorists who saw 10-year-old Carmen Collin half naked on the side of the highway attempting to escape the killer, the police were never able to close the case.
Bro. I mean, you have all the evidence right there. Like, you have, bro. They didn't do anything. Oh my gosh, bro. Sometimes I wonder
Although
if the
police
cops do
did
their
have
job,
several
but
persons of interest, one of them connected as recently as 2011, none of them had close enough ties to the murders to be convicted. Although, interestingly, one of the alphabet killer suspects was sentenced to death for murder for killing sex workers in Nevada, completely unrelated. Strangely, though, all of his victims in Nevada had the same first and last initial. Could this be the alphabet killer from New York? Seems very possible. Shifting our focus over to Scotland now, we have Bible John, an unidentified serial killer who has killed at least 3 young women between 1968 and 1969. All of Bible John's victims are believed to have met him in the Barrowland Ballroom, a popular dance hall in Glasgow, Scotland. Most of the few details known about
lot
this
of these
case
aren't even
come
in
from
the
one of the
United
victim's
States.
sisters, who shared a taxi with her sister and the alleged killer, Bible John. The victim's sister's information helped the investigators form a psychological profile of the killer, with one of his biggest quirks being that he frequently referenced the Bible, hence his nickname, Bible John. Unfortunately, in 2010, the victim's sister has passed away, and we have lost the only eyewitness, meaning that the chances of this case ever being solved are unlikely. Returning back to the United States of America, we have a killer with probably the most outrageous name. I'm talking about the West Mesa Bone Collector. The United States media really does a good
What?
job of
Who
giving
makes these
serial
names, bro?
killers names that are way cooler than they deserve. And also just more gruesome. Like, who thought of Servant Girl Annihilator? Like, annihilation, that is an insane adjective to use. Back to the topic at hand, the West Mesa Bone Collector was a serial killer in West Mesa, Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is also one of the most recent entries on the list, as the remains of 11 women were found buried in 2009 in the desert of West Mesa, obviously.
What?
There are at least
That
13
many?
other potential victims of the West Mesa Bone Collector, reported as late as 2006, who were just not buried in this one mass grave. So,
Bro.
confirmed 11, but potentially all the way up to 24 and beyond. Like many on this list, the police can
24? I mean, bro was just every day he was just going at somebody. That's just a crazy. Like, how do you kill 24 people and not get caught? Like,
considered
I don't
several
know.
suspects, but lacked enough evidence to make a strong enough case against any one suspect. Some theories suggest that the West Mesa Bone Collector may actually be a group of people involved in running a sex trafficking ring, specifically because a lot of these victims were sex workers. As recent as 2021, the police have confirmed that the case is still active, and despite the fact that the police are still receiving 20 to 30 tips per year, there is no new evidence moving the case along. Truly unfortunate. If you haven't heard about any of the killers I've mentioned in this video so far, that's about to change, because the next 2 killers I'm going to discuss
Let's hear
are
about it.
arguably some of the most well-known serial killers
Oh,
of
really?
all time. And that starts with the Zodiac Killer. If that name rings a bell, you probably watched the 2007 Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. blockbuster movie, Zodiac. That movie has no doubt made the Zodiac Killer the most infamous unsolved serial killer in all of American history. The Zodiac Killer has confirmed to have killed 5 victims and injured 2 victims across the span of 1968 and 1969. But he claims that he has killed up to 37. Now you might be asking yourself, what do you mean claim? He wasn't caught. How did he talk to the police? Well, that's kind of where he...
Y'all know about the Zodiac Killer though, bro. I was like 12 years old reading about this, bro. I got so scared. I was like, what if he's still out there, bro? It's insane how he didn't get caught. Like, he used like crazy strategies.
Got his
and
name from.
stuff.
The Zodiac
It's
coined his
insane.
name in a series of taunting messages that he mailed to regional newspapers in which he threatened to go on killing sprees and bombings if they did not print his messages. Some of his letters included cryptographs and ciphers, in which the killer claimed that he was collecting the victims as slaves for the afterlife. This guy was twisted, and that's not even the start of it. Out of the 4 ciphers that the Zodiac made, 2 remain unsolved, and 1 was actually successfully cracked in 2020. Only 1 suspect has ever been named publicly by authorities, and due to the weirdness of this case and the sheer depth of the rabbit hole, there is a large public interest in this story. And I could honestly go on for hours about this with just publicly available information, but for the sake of this video, these are the important details. If this is interesting to you, I highly recommend you do some research on it, as the story does go deep. The last correspondence from the Zodiac Killer with any sort of publication was in 1974. The case has been marked inactive and then reactive a few times over the years, and in some places is still considered active to this very day. But unfortunately, even with all of the public interest, it is unlikely that this case will be solved. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Like I said, this video isn't in any specific order, but I did keep this one for last. One thing I will mention though is that this list isn't every single uncaught serial killer. Unfortunately, there is still a lot more that exist. I just couldn't make this video super long. But if you would like a part 2, I will gladly make it. And for the identity of our final killer, well, that's unknown. This is likely one of the most famous unknown serial killers, and also just serial killers to ever exist. I'm talking about Jack the Ripper. Even if you're not...
Wow. Dang, how did I not guess that, bro? Wait. Was that not the Axeman? Was that not the Axeman? Man, I don't know.
Somebody who binges morbid content or watches serial killer documentaries on the weekends, you've probably heard of this name before. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in the slums of London, England in 1888. Jack's attacks typically involved women working as prostitutes who lived in the slums of East London. These women would have their throats cut and then have their abdominals manipulated. The removal of internal organs of at least 3 victims led to the suspicion that the killer had some surgical knowledge. The official numbers and even motives are unknown, but there are believed to be at least 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper. Much like the Zodiac Killer, the Jack the Ripper lore goes much wider than the scope of this video. But one interesting point I wanted to make is that a lot of what solidified Jack the Ripper's legacy was unintentionally created by the media of the time, which is also the case for a lot more recent serial killers, for example, Jeffrey Dahmer and the like. It's a rather interesting byproduct of spreading awareness, and I thought I'd mention it. But that's it for me, at least for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you like this one, you'd probably like our video on scariest serial killers.
Alright, well, that was a good video. Give it a like, I guess. Alright, we're on to the next one.